A pregnant bride was humiliated in the worst possible way by her fiancé before the wedding, but her revenge was relentless. She had everything until she discovered that she was just a pawn in a game, betrayed, humiliated, and discarded. Isabella could have been the perfect victim, but instead she devised a plan with an ally that no one could have imagined. Calculated revenge, a shocking revelation, an impossible fall. Where are you listening to this story? Let's begin. The mansion was lit with golden lights reflecting the grandeur of the upcoming wedding. The scent of freshly placed flowers in the huge hall mingled with the subtle perfume caro that Isabella always wore. Every detail had been meticulously planned to be perfect, just as she had always dreamed. Inside the spacious room, an impeccably embroidered wedding dress hung from a wooden rack. It was the symbol of everything she believed she was about to achieve: a happy marriage, a loving husband, and now a child growing inside her. Isabella smiled to herself as she looked in the mirror and caressed her belly. The pregnancy test she had taken that morning had come back positive. She hadn't told Ricardo yet. She wanted to wait for the perfect moment. Perhaps during dinner that night when they were alone, she could imagine the scene in her mind. Him smiling, taking her in his arms, telling her he would be the best father in the world. The future seemed perfect, but perfection is fragile and can be shattered in a single second. As she descended the grand marble staircase, she heard muffled laughter coming from Ricardo's office. She wouldn't have paid any attention to it if one of those laughs hadn't sounded all too familiar. Fernanda, her best friend, the maid of honor at her wedding. The door was ajar. Isabella stopped on the last step, feeling a knot in her chest. She didn't want to be nosy, but curiosity pushed her to get a little closer. Then she heard Ricardo's voice, relaxed and amused. "I just have to put up with this charade until she signs the prenup. Then I'll get out of this mess." Isabella's heart stopped. "For a second there, I thought you suspected something." Fernanda's voice sounded malicious. "Isabella." Ricardo let out a dry laugh. "She believes in fairy tales. She feels special because she won me over. But deep down, she's just a trophy to show off. A perfect woman to brag about, but boring. I've never loved her." Isabella's blood ran cold. Her breathing became short, and her chest tightened as if her soul were being crushed by a ton of concrete. "I could marry you instead," Ricardo continued, now in a lower tone. "You've always given me more pleasure than her, so why don't you do it?" Fernanda provoked. "Because your last name opens doors for me. But when I get tired of her, I'll make her sign the agreement and get her out of my life." Isabella's silence was absolute. Her entire world seemed to disappear. Her hands trembled as she leaned against the wall to keep from collapsing. At that very moment, every word was a knife stabbing into her skin, her heart, her soul. She wanted to negotiate with her mind. Maybe she had heard wrong. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. But inside the office, Fernanda laughed, and her laughter was like acid burning her ears. "You're hopeless, Ricardo. And that's what you love." A snap. The sound of kisses. Isabella couldn't hear anymore. Her body reacted before her mind could process it, and she took a step back, stepping on the cold floor of the mansion, as if fleeing a fire. The bitter taste of betrayal spread through her mouth as silent tears burned her face. She wanted to scream. She wanted to burst into that office and end it all, but at the same time she felt paralyzed, suffocated by the shock of the truth. The man she loved, for whom she had sacrificed so much, had never loved her. The best friend she considered a sister was stabbing her in the back, and inside her womb a child was growing, the child of a man who despised her. Reality fell upon her like a tsunami, sweeping away her dreams and leaving only rubble. The silence of the mansion was now deafening. Every tick of the clock on the wall marked another second in which her life was falling apart. Isabella took a deep breath, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Despair threatened to consume her, but something inside her, a small, unstable flame, began to burn. She would not be the victim in this story. She would not let Ricardo destroy her and get away with it. Isabella lifted her chin, swallowed her pride, and for the first time looked at that wedding dress as a symbol of something completely different. She would not be Ricardo's perfect bride. She would be his downfall. The air in the mansion felt heavier that night. The echo of Ricardo's words still resonated in Isabella's mind, as if each syllable had been tattooed on her skin. A trophy in a display case. He never loved her. A game. A damn game. She staggered up the stairs, feeling her body numb, as if it didn't belong to her. Her hands were still shaking. Her breathing was erratic, and the pressure in her chest only increased with each step she took. She locked herself in her room and closed the door. In the absolute silence, her reflection in the mirror gave her back an image she barely recognized. Her eyes were red, her cheeks wet with tears, and her expression was that of someone who had just been torn to pieces. She brought her hands to her belly, a mixture of rage, helplessness, and fear running through her body. Ricardo's child was growing inside her, a child who had not asked to come into the world in the midst of a lie. A wave of nausea hit her hard, forcing her to run to the bathroom. She knelt in front of the toilet and vomited until she felt the emptiness inside her become real. Hot tears fell down her face. Out of control, as the others shook her shoulders, she couldn't go on like this. She couldn't let Ricardo destroy her. When she finally managed to get up, she leaned on the sink, feeling the cold marble against her skin. Her breathing was still ragged, but her mind was beginning to clear. She turned on the faucet and let the water run through her fingers before splashing some on her face. She had to face him. She couldn't stay silent. She left the room with firm steps, going down the stairs with her heart pounding as she approached the office. She could hear Ricardo's voice, still relaxed, still unconcerned. "Fernanda, you know how he is," he said with a smile. "You'll tell her after the wedding. I don't want any more drama today." Isabella slammed the door, slamming it against the wall. Ricardo looked up in surprise. Fernanda sat at the desk with a glass of wine in her hand and let out a nervous laugh. "Honey," said Ricardo with his fake kindness, "are you okay? You look different." Isabella felt a pang of disgust. "How long have you been sleeping with her?" The silence was immediate. Ricardo's expression for a fraction of a second, but he quickly regained his mask of indifference. Fernanda, on the other hand, looked down with a cynical smile. "I don't know what you're talking about, love," said Ricardo, leaning against the desk. "I think you're letting your imagination run wild." The audacity made her boil inside. "I heard everything," Isabella snapped, her voice trembling with contained fury. "You don't need to lie to me. I know what you think of me. I know what you plan to do to me." Ricardo sighed, running a hand through his hair with feigned exasperation. "Look, Isa." His tone was now slow, as if he were talking to a child. "You're upset. I don't want to fight with you right now. You know you have a tendency to exaggerate things." The words were like a punch to the stomach. "You think I'm crazy?" she whispered, feeling the anger burn. "I didn't say that. But look at yourself. You're hysterical over something that didn't even happen. Maybe you should rest and think things through." Fernanda let out a little laugh as if she were enjoying the show. Isabella felt her throat close up. Her rage was so great that it burned inside her. But worst of all, Ricardo didn't even seem concerned. He wasn't afraid that she would leave him. He didn't care, because he was sure that no one would believe her, because he knew he had the power. A chill ran down her spine when she realized that, in a way, he was right. No one would take her side. Ricardo's family adored him. His friends were the same ones he had chosen for her. Her own world was built around him. If she spoke up, she would be the one who would come across as crazy, exaggerated, unstable. Suddenly, she felt the need to laugh. She had truly believed that her love for him had been real. She had really thought that she was special to him. How stupid. She wouldn't give him the pleasure of seeing her break down. She forced herself to swallow her pride, take a deep breath, and lift her chin. "You're right, Ricardo," she said, forcing a small smile. "I think I overreacted." He seemed to relax immediately, satisfied with her apparent submission. "I'm glad you understand, my love." Isabella held his gaze for a long second before turning and leaving the room. She felt Fernanda's gaze on her back and heard Ricardo let out a sigh of relief. There was no point in confronting him like that. Not now. He thought he had won, that she would remain silent, that she would continue to be his trophy. But he was wrong that night. While everyone slept in the mansion, Isabella lay awake in her room, her mind racing. If she was going to do something, she had to do it right. She couldn't be impulsive. She couldn't act without proof. She had to find a way to bring him down. And then she thought of Gail, Ricardo's younger brother. He had always been different. He never seemed too close to the family. He never seemed to fit in completely in that world of appearances. Isabella remembered the way he used to look at Ricardo with something resembling contempt. Gail was a lawyer, intelligent, meticulous, and above all, he had never approved of the way Ricardo treated women. If anyone could help her, it was him, because she would not remain silent. She would not let Ricardo win. He had betrayed her, and now she would destroy him. The night was thick and silent outside. The breeze moved the curtains in Isabella's room, but inside her, a storm raged relentlessly. She had not slept a single second. She could not. Her mind spun without rest, processing every word Ricardo had said, every gesture of contempt, every moment she had been deceived, and now, most importantly, how she was going to destroy him. She knew she couldn't rush into anything. She couldn't risk acting without solid evidence. Ricardo had the power, the money, the influence. If she confronted him without a strategy, he would tear her to pieces. She had to be smart, precise, lethal. Gail. That name had been floating around in her mind for hours. Ricardo's younger brother had always been different, reserved, distant, almost uncomfortable at family gatherings. He never got too involved in his brother's shady business dealings. And when Ricardo talked arrogantly about his conquests, Gail just clenched his jaw as if he found it hard to bear. If anyone could help her, it was him, but that didn't mean he would trust her right away. The next morning, Isabella went down to breakfast, pretending everything was normal. The mansion was in its usual state of luxury and ostentation, the dining room filled with finely arranged dishes, the expensive tableware reflecting the sunlight. The servants moved efficiently. Ricardo sat at the other end of the table with his usual air of self-sufficiency, checking his phone. He didn't even look at her. Isabella felt a chill. She hated him with every fiber of her being, but she smiled. She poured herself some coffee with steady hands, making sure that her voice sounded calm when she spoke. Gail is coming today, right? Ricardo looked up for just a second before returning to his screen. Yes, he's coming to dinner. Mom insisted that we all be together before the wedding. Perfect. She spent the rest of the day moving around the house with the calmness of a woman in love, a bride excited about her big day. She listened to the maid's comments about how beautiful she looked, how lucky she was to marry a man like Ricardo. She smiled, but inside, she was plotting her revenge. When she finally saw Gail enter the house that night, she knew she had not been mistaken. He had always been different, with his well-tailored suit, serious demeanor, and analytical gaze. He did not have Ricardo's arrogance. He did not see her as an object, and that was enough for Isabella to seize her opportunity. She waited until after dinner, until most people were distracted by glasses of wine and empty conversations. That's when she found him in the library, leafing through a book as if he'd rather be anywhere else. "I need your help," she said bluntly. Gail turned his head toward her with a slight look of surprise. "I'm sorry." Isabella closed the door behind her and took a deep breath. "I know what Ricardo is doing to me. I know he's cheating on me with Fernanda. I heard it with my own ears." Gail didn't react immediately, but his eyes darkened. "You know that if you say anything without proof, he'll crush you. That's why I'm here." She took a step closer. "I want proof, and I know you can get it." He watched her silently. "Why do you think I would help you?" "Because you're not like him," Isabella whispered. Gail let out a humorless laugh. "And what makes you think that?" "Because I've never seen you look at me the way he does." A tense silence fell between them. Gail let out a sigh and calmly closed the book. "What exactly do you want?" Isabel's heart beat fast. "I want to expose him. I want everyone to see who Ricardo really is." He studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Fine." That's when the game began. If you're rooting for Isabella's plan, tap like to back her up. Gail had access to more information than Isabel imagined. He knew that Ricardo wasn't exactly discreet about his affairs. In a matter of days, he had obtained private conversations, photos, and explicit messages between Ricardo and Fernanda. The evidence was devastating. Meanwhile, Isabella continued to play her role. Ricardo never suspected anything. He continued to treat her like an ornament, like a luxury accessory that that would soon be his completely. He ignored her when it suited him, kissed her for the photos, and spoke empty words to her when there was an audience, and she let him. But every night, she met with Gail in the library, where they reviewed what they had obtained, adjusted the plan, and shared silences that were becoming less and less uncomfortable. The first time Gail smiled at her sincerely, Isabella felt something strange in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet. It was respect. Someone saw her. Someone listened to her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone, but she didn't allow herself to be distracted. The wedding day was approaching, and when it arrived, Ricardo would discover what it meant to lose. The days leading up to the wedding of Isabella and Ricardo became into a hell disguised as perfection. The mansion was in constant motion. Decorators, event planners, and service staff came and went, making sure every detail was impeccable. The whole world seemed to be setting the stage for the perfect marriage. But only Isabella and Gail knew the truth. They knew that this would not be the beginning of a dream life. It would be the end of Ricardo. Every night, after fake smiles and empty caresses in public, Isabella would meet with Gail in the library, where they planned every move with surgical precision. The evidence they had gathered was irrefutable. Screenshots of explicit messages between Ricardo and Fernanda, call logs, compromising photos, even audio recordings of conversations in which Ricardo bragged about how he would get rid of Isabella after the wedding. "We have everything ready," Gail murmured one night, staring at the screen of his laptop. "There's no way he can get out of this." Isabella nodded, but her expression showed no relief. "We haven't won yet." Gail closed the computer and looked at her intently. "Are you okay?" Isabella let out a humorless laugh. "I'm marrying a man who has humiliated me, who has played with me as if I were an object. I'm going to spend every second of that day pretending to love him, knowing that he has despised me all this time." Gail clenched his jaw. "It's only for a few hours. After that, he'll be the one who has to pretend his life isn't in pieces." Isabella looked at him. There was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, something that made her feel she wasn't completely alone in this. "Thank you, Gail." He held her gaze for a moment, and then looked away. "I'm not doing this for Ricardo," he said almost in a whisper. "I'm doing it for you." Isabella felt a lump in her throat, but she didn't respond. She couldn't allow herself to think about anything other than revenge. There were only 3 days left until the wedding, when Ricardo reminded her once again that, to him, she was nothing more than a decoration. The afternoon was warm, and the garden of La Mansión was decorated with dim lights and white flowers for a dinner prior to the big event. Isabella wore a long ivory dress, her hair elegantly styled, smiling at the guests, playing her role to perfection. Ricardo was by her side in his suit and arrogant attitude, attending to each person with the confidence of someone who believes he is in complete control. At a moment when most of the guests were distracted by conversation, Ricardo leaned toward Isabella and whispered in her ear, "You look beautiful tonight, just as I like you, docile." Isabella forced herself to smile, even though her stomach churned with disgust. "Isn't that what you've always wanted?" she replied in a honeyed tone, feigning complicity. Ricardo smiled smugly. "Of course, a pretty and obedient woman. All you have to do is sign the prenuptial agreement, and you'll be perfect." Isabella felt rage coursing through her body like fire, but she didn't let it show on her face. "I'll do it after the wedding," she whispered seductively, caressing the rim of her wine glass. Ricardo seemed satisfied with that answer. Good girl. Nausea hit her hard, but she remained firm. Gail, who had been watching the scene from a distance, clenched his fists. Later that night, when the guests had left and the house was quiet, Isabella and Gael met for the last time before the big day. The day after tomorrow, Ricardo would be publicly destroyed. He would no longer have his family, his reputation, or his money. Gael looked at her seriously. "And you will be free." That word echoed in Isabella's mind as she watched the computer screen where the evidence against Ricardo was ready to be revealed to everyone. There were only a few hours left before the wedding. Ricardo believed that everything was under his control, but he had no idea what was about to happen. The morning sun filtered through the mansion's windows, illuminating the chaos of the wedding. Designer dresses, makeup artists, stylists, organizers running back and forth, making sure every detail was impeccable. It was the wedding of the year, the union of Ricardo's powerful family with the impeccable image of Isabella. But inside the enormous bridal suite, behind the closed door, Isabella stood motionless. Her reflection in the mirror showed her the image of a woman who, at first glance, had the perfect life. Her white dress, custom designed, fell elegantly over her body. Her hair was pulled back into an impeccable bun, with loose strands framing her face. The fine jewelry around her neck and wrists sparkled in the dim light. But her eyes betrayed the truth. There was no happiness, no excitement, no anticipation, only an icy calm. The silence in the room was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. "Come in," she said without turning around. Gale entered with measured steps, closing the door behind him. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his expression serious, his eyes scanning the scene in front of him. Isabella stood in front of the mirror, holding a cell phone in her hands. "Everything is ready," she said quietly. Isabella nodded slowly. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, taking a step toward her. Isabella looked away from her reflection and looked at him through the mirror. "I've never been more certain in my life," Gale exhaled, sliding his hands into his pants pockets. "Ricardo isn't going to react well. I know that. He might try to hurt you, so let's make sure he has no way out." Isabella turned to him for the first time, showing a hint of emotion in her gaze. "Thank you, Gale." He looked at her intensely, with something in his eyes that she still couldn't quite decipher, but there was no time to think about anything else. Today was the day. Ricardo's end was minutes away. The enormous event hall was decorated like a palace, every corner covered with white flowers, chandeliers shining with warm light, tables with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. The business, political, and social elite were present, hundreds of people dressed in formal attire, ready to witness what was to be the wedding of the year. At the altar, Ricardo waited confidently, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his self-assured smile in place. Everything was going as he had planned. At his side, his father patted him on the shoulder. "Today, you seal the fate of our family, son. I am proud of you." Ricardo smiled arrogantly. "Of course. Everything is under control." The music changed. The doors of the grand hall opened. Murmurs of admiration filled the space when Isabella appeared, walking gracefully down the aisle on her father's arm. Her dress sparkled under the lights. Her face was that of a perfect bride. Her walk was calm and confident, but her heart pounded with every step that brought her closer to the decisive moment. When she reached the altar, Ricardo took her hand and gave her a charming smile. "You look beautiful, my love," he whispered in the same honeyed voice he had used to deceive her so many times. Isabella held his gaze and smiled back, but in her eyes was something that made Ricardo frown for just a second. The priest began with the traditional words of the carefully rehearsed ceremony, but Isabella was barely listening. Only a few minutes remained. Then the moment came. "Your call. Would you expose him right here or walk away? Comment your choice. Expose or walk away." "Ricardo, do you take Isabella as your wife, to love and respect her for the rest of your days?" Ricardo squeezed Isabella's hand firmly. "I do." There was applause and smiles. The priest turned to Isabella. "Do you take Ricardo as your husband?" But she interrupted him. "No." Silence fell like a blow on the crowd. Ricardo tensed. The priest blinked in confusion. Murmurs began to fill the room. Ricardo clenched his jaw and whispered in a low, threatening tone, "What the hell are you doing?" But Isabella did not answer. She slowly raised her hand, holding a small remote control, and pressed a button. The lights dimmed, and on the giant screen behind the altar began to show images, messages, videos, evidence. "What?" Ricardo muttered, his voice strangled. The first image was a message from Ricardo to Fernanda. "I can't wait to get rid of Isabella. I just need her to sign the agreement, and then it will be history." The second image was a video of Ricardo and Fernanda in his office, kissing passionately. The third was an audio clip of Ricardo laughing with a friend. "Love Isabella? Please, I only love her for what she represents. I'll marry her, make sure she doesn't take anything from me, and then I'll trade her for someone better." The entire room fell silent. You could hear the guests' ragged breathing, the sound of glasses being clumsily set down on the tables. Ricardo's parents looked at him in horror. His business partners exchanged glances of disbelief. Fernanda, pale as a ghost, tried to make her way through the crowd to leave the room, and Ricardo was completely paralyzed. His face went from shock to fury in seconds. He turned to Isabella, his jaw tense, his gaze burning with rage. "What did you do, Isabella?" She looked at him with the calmness of someone who finally has the power. "The same thing you have to do with me, Ricardo. Destroy you." The murmurs turned into a deafening murmur. Camera flashes began to go off. The scandal could no longer be stopped. Ricardo tried to approach her, but before he could, Gail appeared out of nowhere and stood between them. "Don't you dare," he warned in a cold voice. Ricardo clenched his fists, his breathing heavy, his world crumbling before him. The wedding was ruined, but that was only the beginning. Chaos erupted like a bomb in the hall. The murmurs of the guests turned into a whirlwind of scandalized whispers and exclamations of disbelief. Camera flashes flickered uncontrollably, capturing every second of Ricardo's humiliation. High society, which he had admired so much and believed himself untouchable, now looked at him with a mixture of disgust and morbid curiosity. Ricardo's parents, sitting in the front row, were pale as if they had just seen a corpse. His mother had one hand over her mouth, her eyes shining with tears of fury and shame. His father, always a proud and calculating man, was completely rigid, his fists clenched on the armrests of his chair. "Tell me this is a mistake." His mother's voice was barely a whisper, but the microphone picked it up and amplified it throughout the room. Ricardo blinked, trying to take in what was happening. His brain couldn't process how, in a matter of seconds, everything he had built was collapsing. No, this couldn't be happening. "This isn't real," he suddenly roared, stepping forward, his face contorted with rage. "Isabella, turn that off right now!" But Isabella didn't move. She stood there in her still impeccable wedding dress, with the firm posture of someone who had been waiting for this moment for too long. Her expression showed neither satisfaction nor revenge, only calm, as if she had finally regained control over her life. As the brilliant and promising businessman he had always been, now they saw him as a fraud, a liar, a repugnant man. Only calm, as if she had finally regained control over her life. The guests no longer saw him as the brilliant and promising businessman he had always been. Now they saw him as a fraud, a liar, a repugnant man. The scandal had broken out, and there was no turning back. His mother stood up abruptly, her chair falling backward with a loud thud. "Tell me it's not true." But Ricardo couldn't respond. His father no longer looked at him as a son. He looked at him as a problem that needed to be eliminated. "This is unacceptable," he snapped in a cold voice, addressing Ricardo as if he were a mere employee who had dragged our family's name into the most shameful scandal we have ever faced. "Dad, listen to me. This doesn't mean anything. I can fix it." His father interrupted him with a look of utter contempt. "You can't." Ricardo felt the world spinning around him. The murmurs grew like an unbearable buzz. His partners, those who had treated him with respect and admiration, now exchanged glances with each other. Several stood up and began to leave the room. Others took out their phones, surely sending messages to lawyers, canceling contracts, cutting ties. His life was falling apart before his eyes. "No, no, no," he muttered, turning around, looking for a way out, an escape. His gaze fell on Fernanda, but she was paralyzed. The guests whispered among themselves as they watched her. Her face, completely distraught, was on the screen. The photos of her encounters with Ricardo still glowed, as did the messages where she mocked Isabella, and the audio recordings of their private conversations. "Say something, Ricardo," he demanded desperately, but Fernanda couldn't respond. The godmothers of the wedding, who had been her friends, now looked at her with disgust and whispered among themselves. Couple of guests. They even moved away from her as if her mere presence repulsed them. The men she had flirted with in the past now looked at her with mockery and lust, certain that they would never take her seriously after this. Her reputation had been destroyed in seconds. Then, without saying a word, Fernanda gathered the hem of her dress, turned on her heels, and ran out of the hall. The sound of her shoes echoed through the empty hallway until she disappeared. She was gone. She had left him alone. "Bitch," Ricardo spat, feeling his hatred overflow. "Watch your language, Ricardo." His mother's voice was now pure venom. "Don't you dare continue dragging our shame." He turned to her in disbelief. "Our shame? This is that crazy woman's fault." He pointed at Isabella with fury. "She planned all this." But his mother was no longer listening to him. His father took a step toward him. "From this moment on, you are out of our family." Ricardo's blood ran cold. "Dad, no. Your access to the accounts is cancelled. I won't allow an idiot like you to continue tarnishing our name. You can't do this to me. I already did." His father turned to his bodyguards and gave them a slight nod. Two burly men immediately approached him. "Get him out of here." Ricardo felt the pressure of two heavy hands grabbing his arms. "Let me go. You can't do this to me. I'm your damn son." But no one listened to him. He was dragged out of the room, kicking and cursing, while the guests watched in absolute silence. The man who had believed himself invincible was now just a pathetic shadow of what he had been. At the altar, Isabella stood watching him with a cold stare. There were no smiles, no cries of victory, only justice. Ricardo disappeared behind the double doors, his voice fading into the distance. The murmurs began again. Isabella looked at Gail, who had remained close to her the whole time. He offered her a small nod. "You did it." Isabella let out a painful sigh. It was over. Ricardo had lost everything. The echo of Ricardo's humiliation still hung in the air of the hall like a ghost impossible to dispel, even though he was no longer there. His fall had left a void impossible to ignore. A man who, until minutes ago, believed himself invincible had been dragged away, reduced to nothing more than a pathetic shadow of his former self. But the show was not over. The guests remained frozen in their seats, as if still trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The murmurs were nervous whispers, conversations broken by exchanged with the weight of disbelief. The cameras continued to record, the flashes blinking uncontrollably. Isabella, still standing at the altar, felt her breath quicken, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her heart pounding not with fear, not with anxiety, but with relief. For the first time in too long, she was breathing freely. But then Gail's voice broke the silence. "Isabella." She turned slowly toward him, her mind still processing what had just happened. Gail was only a few steps away, wearing his impeccable black suit and a serious expression, but with something in his eyes that he had never before shown so openly. Determination, a different kind of sparkle. "I have something to tell you," he continued in a firm tone, but with a note of vulnerability that no one had ever heard in his voice before. The murmuring among the guests intensified. Gail took a deep breath deeply, and without taking his eyes off Isabella, reached into his jacket pocket. And then he did the unthinkable. He knelt down. The air seemed to stop in the room. The murmuring died down in a second. The astonishment was so great that even the camera flashes stopped. Gail opened a small velvet box, revealing a ring, not just any ring, but one different from the one Ricardo had chosen for her. Simpler, more real. Isabella's heart skipped a beat so hard that she felt she couldn't breathe. "I know this isn't the best time," said Gail, his deep voice echoing in the room. "And I know you probably think I'm crazy for doing this here right now." The guests held their breath. Gail's parents, who were still processing Ricardo's humiliation, seemed to freeze in their seats. Isabella's mother, her eyes still wet with tears, with emotion and surprise, brought a hand to her mouth. Gail swallowed and continued, "But there's something I need you to know before this day is over." The silence was absolute. "From the moment I saw you in this family, I knew you were different. I knew you didn't belong in the world of lies my brother put you in. I watched you for years, forced to smile in places you didn't want to be, listening to words you didn't deserve to be treated like something you weren't." Gail's voice cracked just a little, but she held firm. "And when I saw how you fought to get out of this, how you refused to be a victim, I realized that I had never admired anyone as much as I admire you." Isabella felt a lump in her throat. "Gail, I'm not going to ask you to love me today," she said with a slight, melancholy smile. "I know this isn't a fairy tale, but I want you to know that if you choose me, you'll never be anyone's shadow again." The whispers among the guests grew louder. "I want to be by your side, not like my brother had you, but truly, as a man who respects you, who listens to you, who loves you." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever looked at her the way Gail was looking at her now. The seconds seemed to last forever. The guests were expectant. The cameras, the lights, the whole world seemed to have shrunk to that small space between the two of them. Gail looked at her intently. "Isabella, will you marry me?" Love, wild twists, and justice served. Subscribe for more stories like this. She felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. Her whole body trembled, not from fear, but from something unknown, something new. Gail was offering her something she had never had before: freedom, a life where she wasn't a trophy, where she wasn't a porcelain figurine on a shelf. But she was ready. Gail's eyes did not pressure her, did not demand anything of her. They just waited. Isabella swallowed, and then made a decision. Isabella's world seemed to stop. Gail was still kneeling in front of her with the ring in his hand, looking at her with a mixture of hope and vulnerability that she had never seen in him before. Around them, the entire room held its breath, waiting for her answer. Some guests were still processing Ricardo's scandal. Others seemed too stunned to react. But the only thing Isabella felt at that moment was the weight of her own decision. She had never imagined this turn in her life. Just a few weeks ago, she believed her fate was sealed. A loveless marriage, a life trapped in a golden cage. And now she was faced with a choice that no one, not even she herself, had seen coming. Love was not in her plans. Revenge was. But what if this wasn't just revenge? Gail's eyes were sincere. There was no manipulation in them, no possessiveness, no selfishness. It was the gaze of someone who saw her, who listened to her, who respected her. The difference was enormous. Isabella's heart pounded as her thoughts raced. And then, as if everything inside her came to the same conclusion at the same time, her breathing stabilized. She looked up, she looked at Gail, and took a step forward. The murmuring in the room became deafening. Yes, the word came out of her mouth clearly, without trembling, without doubt. The room exploded. The guests let out exclamations. She looked at Gail and took a step forward. The murmur in the room became deafening. Yes, the word came out of her lips clearly, without trembling, without hesitation. The room exploded. The guests let out muffled exclamations. Some women put their hands to their chests in shock. The men exchanged looks of amazement. Isabella's mother let out a small cry of surprise, while Gail's mother covered her mouth with both hands with wide eyes. And the camera flashes exploded. Gail looked at her as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. His breathing quickened, his jaw tensed with contained emotion. But when he saw the determination in Isabella's eyes, when he realized she was serious, he smiled, and in that instant, everything changed. What should have been an imposed marriage, a farce full of lies and deceit, was transformed into something genuine, an act of rebellion, of courage, of choice. Gail stood up with innate elegance, without taking his eyes off her, and with the same care with which one touches delicate glass. He took her hand. The murmurs grew around them, but none of that mattered. He slid the ring onto her finger gently, and when the cold metal touched her skin, Isabella felt her entire past was left behind. The applause was not long in coming, first timid from some people who were still trying to understand what had just happened, then louder and more decisive. Some guests cheered, others laughed in disbelief, but while the crowd reacted, there was one person who remained completely silent. From the shadows of the entrance, Ricardo watched the scene with a distraught expression. He had managed to escape from the guards and had returned, perhaps in the hope of regaining control of the situation. But what he found took his breath away. Isabella stood there, beautiful and radiant, with a smile on her lips. But that smile was not for him. It was for Gael, and that destroyed him. His younger brother, the one he had always seen as an irrelevant shadow, had replaced him in every way. His pride, his prestige, his reputation, his money, and now his wife, or rather, the woman who had never been his. The weight of defeat crashed over him like an unstoppable wave. He felt cold sweat running down his back, his breathing ragged with anger, humiliation, and helplessness. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run to the altar and rip that ring off her finger, but he couldn't move. He was finished. Meanwhile, Gale gently took Isabella's face in his hands and looked at her with the intensity of someone who had waited his whole life for this moment. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible to her. Isabella didn't respond. She just smiled, and in that smile there was something new, something that for the first time in a long time was not pain, was not fear, was hope. As the applause grew and the cameras captured every angle of the moment, Ricardo took a step back, his body tense and his fists clenched, and without anyone noticing, he faded into the darkness. He had lost. The roar of the taxi engine was deafening in Ricardo's head as he stared out the window, his gaze lost. Outside, the city continued on its course, indifferent to his fall. A man in a suit walked down the sidewalk with his phone pressed to his ear, laughing. A couple of well-dressed women came out of a luxury store loaded with bags. The world had not stopped for him, but his had. He took out his cell phone with trembling hands and checked the messages Fernanda had sent him for the umpteenth time. "Answer me. You know this isn't just mine, right? You were in those videos too. Answer me. Don't be stupid. I need to see you." Nothing. Not a single reply. He tapped the screen with his finger, furious, and dialed her number. 1, 2, 3 rings. Voicemail. He cursed and dropped the phone on his lap. "Sir, where exactly do I take you?" asked the taxi driver, looking at him in the rearview mirror. Ricardo clenched his jaw. He didn't even have an answer. His penthouse was no longer his. His cards had been blocked. His father, his mother, his supposed friends had all turned their backs on him. He knew that the scandal had exploded on all social media, with hundreds of articles with his name stamped on the headlines. Fallen tycoon Ricardo Montenegro is abandoned by his own family after a scandal of infidelity and fraud, dirty betrayal, and a ruined marriage. The videos that sank Montenegro. Who is Isabella Ramos, the woman who destroyed one of the most influential businessmen in the country? Every news story, every comment, every mockery, every dirty betrayal, and a ruined marriage. The videos that sank Montenegro. Who is Isabella Ramos, the woman who destroyed one of the most influential businessmen in the country? Every news story, every comment, every mockery, every dirty betrayal, and a ruined marriage. The videos that sank Montenegro. Who is Isabella Ramos, the woman who destroyed one of the most influential businessmen in the country? Every news story, every comment, every mockery, every dirty betrayal, and a ruined marriage. The videos that sank Montenegro. Who is Isabella Ramos, the woman who destroyed one of the most influential businessmen in the country? Every news story, every comment, every mockery, and dirty fraud, dirty betrayal, and a ruined marriage. The videos that sank Montenegro. Who is Isabella Ramos, the woman who destroyed one of the most influential businessmen in the country? Every news story, every comment, every mockery was a dagger buried in his pride. He, Ricardo Montenegro, the man who had everything, was now nothing more than a broken piñata hanging in the public square for everyone to beat. The taxi stopped at a traffic light. A group of young people on the corner looked at the car, and one of them narrowed his eyes as if he recognized Ricardo. "No way! It's him! It's Montenegro, you bastard!" How does it feel to lose everything? Laughter exploded in the air. Ricardo felt the heat rise to his face. His instinct was to open the door and yell at them, threaten them, remind them who he was, but he was nobody anymore. He lowered his head and pressed his temples with both hands, feeling the anger and helplessness. "Take me to Fernanda's house," he growled. Night had fallen when he arrived at his destination. Fernanda's house was still as imposing as ever, with its modern architecture and huge windows. But something was different this time. The lights were off. Ricardo got out of the taxi and staggered to the door. He rang the bell insistently. He knocked on the wood with his fist. "Fernanda, open the door!" He felt a lump form in his throat. She couldn't have left. No. She checked her phone again, and saw her last message. "You have no idea what you did to me. I hope you rot in your own—" No, Fernanda. She had never been loyal to anyone except herself, and as soon as she saw him fall, she did what she knew best. She ran away. Ricardo staggered backward, feeling his legs give way. He leaned against the wall, looking up at the dark sky. He had nothing left. No family, no money, no partners, not even the woman with whom he had destroyed his own engagement. He was completely alone. A chill ran down his spine when he understood with brutal clarity what that meant. For the first time in his life, Ricardo Montenegro was not in control. He was a nobody, and worst of all, he deserved it. In the tranquility of a moonlit beach, Isabella smiled, wearing a light dress, her hair loose, moving with the sea breeze. In front of her, Gail held a glass of wine and looked at her with an intensity that only he knew how to do. "What are you thinking?" he asked with a slight smile. Isabella sighed, finally breathing. Gael reached out and gently brushed her cheek. "You just needed to be reminded of that." Isabella looked down and caressed her belly tenderly. "Do you think I was too cruel?" she murmured, without needing to explain. "What do you mean?" Gael shook his head. "You weren't cruel. You just gave him what he deserved." Isabella looked at him and saw the truth in his words. Ricardo had built his own grave, and she had simply let him fall into it. The difference between them was clear. Ricardo had chosen power and lost everything. She chose freedom and gained more than she ever imagined. Gael took her hand and intertwined it with his. "Let's go inside," he said softly. "It's cold." Isabella followed him, letting the sea breeze carry away the last traces of the past. Ricardo Montenegro was just a name, a memory of what she would never do again, and she would never, ever look back. The full moon gently illuminated the calm sea, reflecting its silver light on the terrace of the beach house. The salty breeze carried with it the sound of waves breaking on the sand, creating a serene, almost hypnotic melody. Isabella stood barefoot on the warm wood of the deck, gazing at the horizon. Her light dress moved with the wind, and her hands rested on her belly, where a new life was growing. She smiled. It was not a forced smile like the ones she had so often had to hide her pain. It wasn't an empty smile like the ones she offered at social events to maintain the illusion of a perfect marriage. It was a genuine smile, the smile of someone who had finally found peace. Gael appeared behind her silently, as he always did when he wanted to respect her space, but Isabella already felt his presence before he spoke. He slid an arm around her waist and rested his chin on her shoulder. "You can't sleep," he whispered. "I don't want to sleep," she sighed, leaning slightly against him. "I want to savor every second of this." Gael hugged her tighter, as if he understood exactly what she meant. She had spent so many years living in Ricardo's shadow, suffocated by his lies, manipulated by his words, reduced to a mere ornament. Freedom was something new, something precious, something she would never take for granted again. Gael slid his hand over her belly, covering her with his. "You told him," she said. She knew who he was referring to. "No, I didn't," Gael replied slowly, as if processing the weight of those words. "Sooner or later, he'll find out." Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind ruffle her hair. Maybe, but that didn't matter anymore. And it was true. Ricardo Montenegro no longer had power over her. If he ever found out she was pregnant, it would be too late to do anything about it. He was no longer part of her life. Her past was buried. The future belonged only to her. Gael gently turned her to face him, his dark eyes reflecting the dim light of the moon. "Are you happy?" he asked, and there was something vulnerable in the way he said it. Isabella looked at him for a long moment, absorbing the sincerity in his expression. Gael was not like Ricardo. He never had been. He did not see her as a trophy. He didn't want to control her, mold her, or use her for his own interests. He wanted her to be free, and paradoxically, it was by his side that she found exactly that. "Yes," she finally replied for the first time. "I am happy." Gael smiled and pulled her close for a soft, tender, unhurried kiss. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to lose herself in that moment, feeling every touch, every gesture, every second. There was no more fear, no more pain, only certainty. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, far from there, in the darkness of a cheap hotel room. Ricardo looked at his own reflection in the mirror. He didn't recognize the man he saw. Unkempt beard, messy hair, deep dark circles under his eyes, and lifeless eyes. His phone was silent. No calls, no messages, no attempts to contact him. No one was looking for him. No one cared about him. He tried to recover his company. He tried to convince former allies to give him another chance. He tried to call lawyers to find legal loopholes to recover anything that was once his empire, but everything was gone. His family had disowned him. His fortune was out of reach. His contacts had betrayed him. Even Fernanda, his accomplice, had vanished without a trace. He was completely alone. A chill ran down his spine when he understood with brutal clarity what that meant. For the first time in his life, Ricardo Montenegro was not in control. He was a nobody, a failure, and worst of all, he deserved it. Time passed, and the scandal that had once made headlines faded into oblivion. Isabella moved on, leaving behind the shadows of her past. Her belly grew, bringing with it new hope. Gail was by her side every moment, supporting her, caring for her, making sure she never felt alone again. And when she finally held her son in her arms for the first time, she knew that she had won, not out of revenge, not out of hatred, but because she had chosen to save herself. And this time, no one would take that away from her. While Ricardo became a distant memory, a bitter lesson about what it means to lose everything, Isabella looked to the future, without fear, without regrets, and for the first time in a long time, without looking back. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to explore more content on our channel. We have many more exciting and thought-provoking stories like this one that seek to inspire you and show you that there is always hope. Click on the following video and join us for another story that is sure to captivate you from the very beginning. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your comments, and share this video with those you think might need it. Thank you for being part of this community. See you in the next video.